said, "You will find a bullet in him." And they called me in the morning. They said, "You're amazing." And I said, "Why?" And they said, there was a bullet in him. And
Hollywood has always been a place of illusion. Fake danger, fake blood, fake death. Actors pretend to suffer, pretend to fall, pretend to die. And then, when the cameras stop rolling, they stand back up. But on March 31st, 1993, inside a movie set in Wilmington, North Carolina, something went terribly wrong. A young actor stood beneath dim lighting, wearing a long black trench coat. The atmosphere was dark, gothic, violent. Rain machines sprayed water across the set. Crew members prepared for another scene in a film called The Crow. For everyone present, it looked like an ordinary filming day. No one imagined they were about to witness one of the most shocking tragedies in Hollywood history. The actor stepped into position. A prop gun was raised, the cameras rolled, and then the gun fired. Seconds later, the actor collapsed. At first, people thought he was improvising. The fall looked real, too real. But then the silence changed. Crew members stopped moving. Someone screamed. Another person ran toward him. And suddenly, panic spread across the set, because the actor lying on the floor was not pretending anymore. That actor was Brandon Lee, only 28 years old, the son of martial arts legend Bruce Lee, a rising star whose career was finally about to explode worldwide. But instead of becoming Hollywood's next action icon, Brandon Lee became the center of one of cinema's most haunting deaths. And for decades afterward, people would continue asking, how could an actor die from a prop gun? Was it really just an accident? Why were so many safety failures ignored? And why does Brandon Lee's death still feel so mysterious, even today? To understand Brandon Lee's story, you first have to understand the shadow he was born into, because before Brandon ever stepped onto a movie set, his family name was already legendary. Brandon Bruce Lee was born on February 1st, 1965, in Oakland, California. His father was already becoming famous, not just as a martial artist, but as a cultural revolution. At that time, Bruce Lee was changing the world's perception of martial arts forever. Fast, charismatic, intelligent, explosive on screen.
I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the
On
cup.
screen, he became a symbol of strength, discipline, and individuality. And because of that, his family lived under enormous attention, especially his son. From the moment Brandon was born, people expected something extraordinary from him. Not because of who he was, but because of whose son he was. That kind of pressure changes a child. Friends later described Brandon as energetic, emotional, deeply sensitive, determined to prove himself. But there was one event that would shape his life forever. July 20th, 1973. Hong Kong. The world received shocking news. Bruce Lee was dead, only 33 years old. The circumstances surrounding Bruce Lee's death immediately created speculation. Official explanations pointed toward cerebral edema, a swelling of the brain, but rumors exploded worldwide. People claimed he had been poisoned, organized crime was involved, rival martial artists targeted him, he was cursed. No theory was ever proven. But one thing became certain. Bruce Lee's death would become one of Hollywood's great mysteries. And Brandon was only 8 years old. Losing a father is devastating. Losing a father who the world considers immortal is something else entirely. For Brandon, Bruce Lee was not mythology. He was simply Dad. And suddenly, he was gone. The tragedy transformed Brandon's life, not only emotionally, but socially, because everywhere he went, people compared him to a ghost. As Brandon grew older, he struggled with identity. Who was he? Was he Brandon Lee or Bruce Lee's son? Like his father, Brandon trained intensely. He studied martial arts, physical conditioning, philosophy, acting. But unlike Bruce, Brandon possessed a different personality, more emotional, more rebellious, less controlled publicly. Acting ambitions, Brandon wanted to become an actor. But Hollywood was complicated. Executives constantly viewed him through one lens. Can he replace Bruce Lee? That expectation frustrated him deeply, because Brandon did not want to imitate his father. He wanted his own identity, his presence on screen. Still, people noticed something familiar: the charisma, the movement, the intensity in his eyes. It felt impossible to separate the father from the son. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, Brandon slowly built his career. He appeared in action films, television projects, martial arts movies. Among them, Legacy of Rage, Showdown in Little Tokyo, Rapid Fire, and with each role, his confidence grew. Hollywood begins to notice. Critics started saying something new. Brandon Lee is becoming a star in his own right. Not Bruce Lee's replacement, not a copy, his own person. And then came the project. That would change everything. The film was dark, violent, stylized, emotionally intense. Its name, The Crow. Based on a graphic novel, the story followed a murdered musician named Eric Draven, who returns from the dead to avenge his fiance's murder. The role demanded emotional pain, physical action, vulnerability, rage. Brandon Lee was perfect for it. Behind the scenes, the production was under pressure. Budget limitations, long shooting schedules, exhausted crew members, constant delays, and those conditions can become dangerous on film sets, especially when firearms are involved. Movies often use real guns modified for filming, dummy rounds, blanks. A blank cartridge creates sound, flash, smoke, but unlike normal bullets, it contains no projectile. However, blanks are not harmless. At close range, they can still injure or kill. And on the Crow set, multiple safety errors were already happening. Long before the fatal scene was filmed, the danger had already begun, and almost no one noticed it. The weapon used during the production was a real revolver. Like many film productions of the early 1990s, the movie relied on real firearms modified for cinematic use. This was common practice in Hollywood, and most of the time, it worked safely. But safety on movie sets depends on one thing above all else: precision. One mistake can be dangerous. Multiple mistakes can become deadly. Earlier in production, the crew needed close-up shots showing bullets inside the revolver cylinder. To create realistic-looking cartridges, they assembled dummy rounds. Dummy rounds look real, but should contain no gunpowder, no explosive charge, no live projectile capability. However, according to later investigations, the production crew improvised parts of the process themselves, and this decision became catastrophic. So, what went wrong? At some point, a primer inside one dummy round accidentally discharged. The explosion was small, barely noticeable, but it was powerful enough to push part of a bullet fragment into the gun barrel. Nobody realized it, nobody checked properly, and the revolver was returned to production use. This tiny fragment would later become fatal. March 31st, 1993, Wilmington, North Carolina. The crew prepared to film another sequence for The Crow. The scene was relatively simple. Brandon Lee's character, Eric Draven, walks into an apartment. A character inside raises a revolver and fires. Hollywood had filmed scenes like this thousands of times before. Routine, controlled, expected. Cameras roll. The set was dark. Rain effects sprayed through the windows. Crew members watched monitors quietly. Brandon stepped into frame, focused, professional, calm. The revolver was loaded with blanks, or at least, that's what everyone believed. The shot, the trigger was pulled. A loud blast exploded across the set, and instantly, something terrible happened. The blank charge fired with enough force to propel the lodged bullet fragment out of the barrel. Like a real bullet, it struck Brandon Lee in the abdomen. Confusion. On set at first, many crew members thought Brandon was still acting. The collapse looked realistic, painful, convincing, but seconds passed, and he didn't move. People began realizing something was terribly wrong. Someone shouted for help, Another crew member rushed forward. Panic spread rapidly. The illusion of cinema disappeared instantly, and reality took its place. Emergency responders arrived quickly. Brandon Lee was rushed to the hospital. Doctors immediately understood the severity of the injury. The fragment had entered his abdomen, causing catastrophic internal damage. Surgeons fought for hours to save him. Blood loss was massive. Internal injuries were extensive. Friends, crew members, family, everyone waited desperately for good news. But the situation continued worsening. And then, the news arrived. On March 31, 1993, after hours of surgery, Brandon Lee was pronounced dead. He was only 28 years old. The set fell silent. Hollywood entered shock, and almost immediately, questions began. Authorities launched an investigation into the shooting, and what they discovered was deeply disturbing. Investigators concluded that Brandon Lee's death was not caused by one single mistake. It was caused by many. Reports pointed toward improperly assembled dummy rounds, failure to inspect the firearm barrel, inadequate weapons supervision, production shortcuts, exhausted crew conditions. The production was operating under financial strain. Some departments reportedly lacked experienced specialists, and when productions cut corners, small errors can multiply quickly. The revolver should have been checked thoroughly after every stage of handling. If the lodged fragment had been discovered, Brandon Lee would have survived. One inspection, one moment of attention, one proper safety check. That's all it would have taken. Even after the investigation, people struggled to accept the explanation emotionally, because the coincidences surrounding Brandon Lee's death felt haunting. Both Brandon and his father, Bruce Lee, died young, unexpectedly, at the height of rising fame, and both deaths immediately created worldwide mystery. Some people began claiming the Lee family was cursed, supernatural forces were involved, destiny repeated itself. The theories spread rapidly, especially because The Crow itself dealt with death, resurrection, and revenge from beyond the grave. Humans naturally search for meaning in tragedy, especially when coincidences feel emotionally overwhelming. But realistically, there is no evidence supporting anything supernatural. The real horror of Brandon Lee's death was entirely human. Negligence, pressure, mistakes. After Brandon's death, many believed the film would never be completed. The cast was devastated. Crew members were traumatized. Some questioned whether production should continue at all. But eventually, the filmmakers made a decision. They would finish the movie. For Brandon, using stunt doubles, visual effects, careful editing. The production was completed, and when The Crow released in 1994, it became something far bigger than a movie. It became a symbol, a memorial, a tragedy frozen on film forever. Fans were deeply emotional watching Brandon on screen because everyone knew the man they were watching was already gone. And somehow, that made every scene feel more powerful, more haunting, more real. Perhaps the saddest part of this story is how hopeful Brandon's life had become before his death. He was engaged to be married. Friends described him as optimistic, focused, excited for the future. He believed The Crow would change his life. And he was right, just not in the way anyone imagined. Those who knew him, people close to Brandon, often described him as thoughtful, philosophical, emotionally deep, funny, intense. He wasn't trying to become Bruce Lee. He was trying to become himself. And many believe he was finally beginning to succeed. So who really killed Brandon Lee? On the set of The Crow, the actor who fired the gun that accidentally killed Brandon Lee was Michael Massee. However, it's important to understand that Michael Massee was not considered a murderer or intentional killer. Brandon Lee's death was officially ruled an accidental shooting caused by a series of major safety failures involving the prop gun and improperly prepared dummy rounds during filming. No criminal charges were filed against Michael Massee. He later said the incident traumatized him deeply and that he struggled emotionally with it for years, until he died of stomach cancer in Los Angeles on October 20, 2016, at the age of 64. The tragedy became one of Hollywood's most famous on-set accidents and later led to stronger firearm safety discussions in the film industry. Hollywood creates illusions for a living, but on March 31st, 1993, the illusion disappeared. Thank you for watching. Please like,
We
share,
think
and
that he's
subscribe to
dead,
Factor Belief.
But the guy shot a blank gun at him. How could he be dead? He's dying. He's severely hurt, maybe dead. And I said, you will find a projectile in him. You'll find a bullet in him. And they said, that can't be. You're crazy. And I said, you will find a bullet in him. And they called me in the morning. They said, you're amazing. And I said, why? And they said, there was a bullet in him. And I can go through the whole story on what really happened, which most people don't know. But the long and the short is when Brandon passed like that, I